right, welcome to the Autoimmune Doc Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Taylor Krick, and I love breaking down the mechanisms underlying autoimmunity and chronic and complex illness. And today I'm joined by Ryan Ayala, and he is going to be my new co-host on the podcast. And maybe not every single episode, but we are working together on some things, within this space. So he's going to tell a little bit about himself because he's got his own autoimmune journey, and that's really how we connected. But it's more about how do we get this information out to more and more people. And I like doing podcasts, but sometimes I just get busy. Sometimes I get stuck. Sometimes I get lazy, So Ryan's going to help wring some of this information out of my, towel and get it to you guys. So you might be seeing his face or hearing his voice on future episodes. But Ryan, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your story.
Well, thank you, Dr. Taylor. I think, first of all, my role in this is to play the role of the patient, if you will. And as somebody who's been an autoimmune patient myself and has gone through this journey, I know all the burning questions that comes up and all those late night Google or ChatGPT searches that you have as someone struggling with an autoimmune condition. So my role in this journey is just going to be to ask Dr. Taylor those burning questions that you have when you are somebody who's struggling with an autoimmune condition. But for myself, I was diagnosed with hidradenitis suppurativa when I was 16, which is a autoimmune skin condition that causes you to have boils on the skin. And that journey led me to researching all I could for many, many years when it came to the world of autoimmunity. And that has led me to connecting with Dr. Taylor. I started a blood testing company called Labify Health to help make direct-to-consumer lab testing more available. And today I'm going to be just asking Dr. Taylor some of your burning questions when it comes to autoimmunity and functional medicine as a whole. So excited to break all this stuff down today.
Yeah, me too. I love talking about it. So helps to just have some guidance too. So let me know any questions, and I'll give you my opinion on them.
Let's start with something that I know has been pertinent to you this week in your clinical work, which is childhood eczema. And what are some of the best labs? I know childhood eczema is something that is incredibly common. What are the best labs to do to kind of uncover that root cause of what's going on?
Yeah, great question. So first off, one of the reasons why it's hot on my radar this week is I had somebody reach out to me this week, and she said my kid is having eczema, and I think it got worse over Christmas because of diet, and that's something I hear all the time, and she reached out too. She knew because I've helped somebody she knows with their kids' eczema and their skin is cleared up. And so that's a lot of times how people, hear about me. But she reached out and she said, I want to do a foods test because I think it was food related. And I said, well, that's not a bad idea, but it wouldn't be my number one thought. So I'll tell you what my number one thought is in a sec here. But let me just also talk about just inflammatory skin issues, because sometimes it's eczema, sometimes it's psoriasis, sometimes it's hives, sometimes it's, perioral dermatitis, which is just redness around the mouth and things like that. Or, it might be cradle cap. I mean, it might be, I don't know. It could be a lot of different names that they put on it, but it's an inflammatory skin condition. And so a lot of times it is food related, but more importantly than food, I would say it's gut related. Now, the gut and food are, hard to separate because that's where food goes, right? So if you're eating a lot of gluten or sugar or things like that, it can fuel an inflammatory skin issue, but it does that by its influence on the gut and the influence on the gut microbiome. And so I think that just little tidbit of info is helps explain my answer, because my number one test would be a stool test. My number one test would be a stool test. And I'll tell you, there's 3 that I would ever do. And I always give people options based on their budget. Some people have 8 kids at home and they're like, I don't want to spend $1,000 on labs, but I'd like to get this kid to be able to sleep at night without itching. They have to wear, some kids have to wear gloves at night because they itch so bad and things like that. And it's real miserable for the kid, of course. It's also miserable for the parents too. But the top 3 labs would be number one, a stool test. And that just gives the most info. quite frankly, what's living in the gut, what's not living in the gut. Do we have a lot of diversity and abundance? Do we have, a lot of the good bugs that we want as far as probiotics? Do we have any overgrowths? Do we have any H. pylori or any parasites or any, Klebsiellas or staph or strep or what have you, or inflammatory markers too? So just that test just gives the most info. And that's what we want to look for is like, well, what do we need to do in this kid's gut? Do we need to pull weeds? Do we need to plant seeds? Do we need to heal the gut lining with leaky gut and things like that? But stool test is my number one. Number two might be foods, but I'd say two and three might be tied too. I try to put them in priority order, but two would be foods. And food test, the downside of food testing is it only gives you one answer. Which foods? The upside is that it gives you that answer. And so like, what do I need to cut out? But the foods aren't usually the cause. The foods are just pouring fuel on the fire, I would say. So you're looking for like, how can I stop pouring fuel on this fire? And we still, even if you cut out gluten or dairy or corn or something like that, we still want to heal the gut lining and decrease the reactivity. So that's why I think a stool test would trump a foods test. And then even with foods testing, there's a lot of different, options as far as number of foods and costs and things like that too. But foods would be my number two. And then my number three would be in organic acids. Anybody that's listened to my channel or things like that knows that I find the organic acids a really useful test. Now, the only concern is if you do an oats test, which is the name for oats, if you do an oats test and it doesn't give you any answers, then it wasn't the right test at that time. But it's great for kids, and it looks a little bit into the gut, but also a little bit into these other areas like neurotransmitters and detoxification and B vitamins. So that's the value of an oat test. But an oat test is more specific or sensitive, I should say, for yeast and mold in the gut. So sometimes you do a foods test, you do a stool test, and you don't find any yeast in the gut, but you do an organic acids test, and sometimes it's off the charts. And the concern is with all three of those tests, one of them is going to tell us our biggest answers. It's hard to know which one it's going to be. So if we do all three, a lot of times it's worth it, meaning like we're glad we did. But those are my three tests, and I'll just stop there, Ryan, because those would be my top three tests for childhood inflammatory skin conditions or adult. Same thing, same answer. But the kiddos, especially, it's brutal.
One thing that when I was going through my journey that plagued my mind and plagued my thinking was this thought that I would have to eat very bland, like an autoimmune paleo type of diet for the rest of my life. And that I was subject to this very strict diet forever. And I think that thinking kind of plays with you a bit. What's the reality there? If you're somebody dealing with bad eczema and you have to do a strict diet, what is the reality on the long-term view of that?
I would say people don't like when we use the F words. One is forever. Nobody wants to hear that. The other one is fasting. That people come in and they're like, oh, my blood sugar's going to drop or things like that. It's like, all right, don't worry, we'll talk about it later. And then people come in, 2 months later, they're like, guess what I'm doing? I'm fasting. It's like, I knew you'd be able to. And I don't teach that for everybody, but I don't think that the answer is forever, Ryan. I think that the answer is forever if you're not actively trying to heal it. But an autoimmune paleo diet, first off, too, an autoimmune paleo diet could be delicious. It is really, really good. It's not bland at all. It's just new. And you're missing some of, the things that might be, the sugars and the whatever, there's a lot of things missing from an AIP diet as far as restriction. But I always tell people too, there's AIP is the most restrictive. Then there's paleo, and you can go stair steps. Actually, that's a good thing, Ryan. You probably don't even know this. I have a document and an ebook and a video that I made called the 10 Steps of Autoimmune Eating. And step 10 is AIP. But there's step 9, there's step 8, there's step 7, there's step 6. And like step number 3 or 4 might be gluten-free. And then 5 is dairy and 6 is eggs or whatever it is. But you can go down as you're healing. And then if you feel like things are getting worse, if you feel like you're flaring, you might want to go up step 8, 9, 10 until that flare calms down. And so I think about, like I said before, it's the foods aren't, in my opinion, always the cause. but they're pouring fuel on the fire. And so if you're doing gluten all the time and you've got a thyroid condition, you might not heal that. If you're doing, dairy all the time or whatever shows up, sometimes on your sensitivity test too, if you've got, antibodies to a food or a food's driving an inflammatory reaction, you need to cut that food out so that you can heal, so you can put that fire out. But once that fire's out, you can test the waters. And I'm more of the opinion, Ryan, of like, you got to be able to live life. I am, have 3 kids and just we're not AIP all the time. And even recently, I got my labs back and my thyroid wasn't doing well. I was like, crap, I got to get back gluten-free 100%. So I'm back gluten-free 100%. But before that, I hadn't been. And that's the slippery slope. That's the concern is that, a little bit can go a long way. And it's like, well, crap, now I'm going to flare. But so you want to be careful. But I have people all the time say things like, I can eat a little bit of gluten and I feel fine. But if I eat it 3 meals in a day, I feel like I got hit by a bus. So a little bit might be tolerable, but a lot might not be. So that is a really, really tricky question. Out of
Mhm.
all the complexity with autoimmunity and the other, conditions that I see, whether they're autoimmune or not, what can I eat is one of the hardest questions because even on a food sensitivity or from an autoimmune standpoint, a FODMAP food might bloat somebody,
Mhm.
but it's not an autoimmune trigger, and it might broccoli might not show up on a food sensitivity test, but some people eat it and they feel like somebody blew up a balloon inside their belly. So you can't test everything. Histamine's another one. FODMAPs, histamine, lectins, nightshades. The lectins and the nightshades are at least cut out on an AIP diet, but it's really, really tricky. But my thought is just going back to your original question. In my opinion, nothing is forever, and I draw a lot of times this drawing that's real simple. It's like we want to restrict whatever we need to restrict, and I draw it up at the top. But I'm like, our focus is on healing. As the healing goes up, the restrictions should come down. And then people are like, hey, I'm able to eat this without noticing anything. I'm able to do this. I'm able to have a glass of wine with my friends or something like that. It's like, well, don't have a bottle, but meaning a little bit can become a problem if you do a lot of it, but it becomes more tolerable as we're working on someone's tolerance or as we're healing their gut or we're raising their vitamin D or whatever we're trying to do.
One thing I've noticed through about 10 years now of trying to solve my own skin issues is that, and obviously this doesn't apply to childhood eczema directly, but I have 3 buckets. There's sleep, there's alcohol, and there's diet. And if I do any one of those on its own, it won't cause any issues for me in terms of flare-ups. But if I start to combine those things, if I drink alcohol and sleep poorly, it's a maybe if I'm gonna get a flare-up. But if I
Yeah,
do
and
all
those two things
three,
often find each other with each other.
yes, exactly. But if I do all three, it's a recipe for disaster. And I know that if I drink alcohol, I have to be a little bit stricter with my diet those that day before or that day of and that day after. And same thing with my sleep. If I'm sleeping bad, I got to be on point with the other 2 buckets. And I found that having that continuum of knowing those 3 things has made the world of difference for me and just knowing my boundaries of where I could go.
Well, and what I would say, Ryan, same thing, I completely agree, but it's like balancing, output with recovery. It's same thing with, if you're a marathon runner, well, guess what? You better not run a marathon every day. You got to do it and then you got to recover to do it again. Or same thing with, an NFL player that takes they've got, practice all week long and they're ice bathing and they're taking supplements and they're doing everything they can to get that inflammation down and then they go out there and do it again. So it's this balance of like stressors versus de-stressing. And the only thing that I would change about what you said, because I like what you said, but I draw the bucket all the time. And so with the bucket though, what I heard from you is like you have 3 big hoses that
Mm.
fill that bucket. And if you turn them all on at the same time, that bucket's going to fill faster. So that's the way that I describe it to people, because let's say even with histamine, I'm like, hey, it's not one hose. It's not even just mold or just your gut or just stress or just food. It's all those things. And sometimes you get a stressful event, boom, you flare. Another time, you got no stress and you eat too much crap food, boom, you flare or you miss sleep. There are all these things. drive inflammatory processes. And I also share a lot of documents with people from mentors of mine and things like that because they say this. It's like a lot of things in a functional medicine practice can drive inflammation. Toxic exposure, stress, dysbiosis, food reactions, sleep dysregulation, all those things. And it's useful to inventory those things because we want to figure out, well, what's causing your flare versus another flare. And it's like, well, don't do that again. Don't pull an all-nighter again or whatever it is. But that's not just you, Ryan. That's smart that you figure that out, but that's a little bit of everybody is this balance of like, what can I handle? And then how much recovery do I have to have? And then in that, trying to raise the tolerance for those things, trying to get you to be able to tolerate a little bit more. But as we age, like I can't tolerate sleep loss the way that I used to be able to, or alcohol too. I just can't do what I used to be able to do, and it's probably for good reason. But so those things naturally decline as we age, and you just can't handle as much. But it's like I still think that most people should be able to handle a lot, and it's like kind of this balance of like living fast as you can, but dying as slowly as you can. So I'm a fan of like not, I don't know, putting too many handcuffs on people or making people be overly restrictive. It's like you got to be able to live your life, but if your life is pouring fuel on the fire, you better slow it down. But if your life is pouring water on the fire, good, and you got to balance those two things out.
And speaking of lifespan here, one thing that a opinion I saw, and this was just that, an opinion, was this idea that one of the major reasons why women live longer than men is because they have this monthly release of blood. And that's something that, we know iron, when it's exposed, if you have a bike, what does iron do? It rusts. And people, have theorized that it does a similar thing in your body when you have too much of it. And this idea that, women by releasing iron monthly is one of the reasons why they may live a longer life or have a longer lifespan. Just wanted to get your perspective on that. I know that hyperferritin is something that's been quite common in your practice recently. So just want to get your perspective on all that stuff because it's quite fascinating. I don't think I've heard too many people talk about those two things being connected.
Yeah. Well, and first off, just to the opinion or the theory, I don't disagree. I mean, it's just we know women live longer than men. That's not a theory, that's a fact. But then we try to explain why. And is it because of, estrogen? Is it because of, who they're less stupid than we are? There's a lot of theories, but that one's a good one because I don't know the answer to that. But let me just talk about ferritin. So I told Ryan, off air that the last 4 people that I've seen have had high ferritin. So let me tell you about each one of them because it's crazy. And first off, that's really rare. It's not that I see it all the time, but for 4 in a row, like that doesn't happen all the time. But let me tell you about them. So one of them, one of them, we just got his labs back, and he came in this week with his wife, and he's like a executive and very, I think, successful guy business wise and stuff. He has 0 symptoms. Feels great. He's maybe 50. He just wants to do blood labs. He just wants to look deep into his risk factors and want somebody that actually interprets them and, but has 0 complaints. So even as we were talking, it's like, man, you don't got any problems to solve. We're just looking. Now, what we found was he's got the most problems of everybody to solve, quite frankly, but his ferritin was really, 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 really high, but asymptomatic. The other one, and these are in no order, I guess. Another one was a woman, postmenopausal, so no longer bleeding, and elevated ferritin. Now, the reference ranges for women and men are different, but we're talking lab high ferritin. I forget what her number was, but lab high ferritin. And then the next one was a 30-year-old male who has found it multiple times. He's done some, labs, that are commercially available that he's got. And there's he came to me with this elevated ferritin. and it keeps going up. And he's even given blood a couple times, and it keeps going up. I told him yesterday, I was like, you need to go to the doc and get this looked at. You might need to go to a hematologist. You need to go get this properly diagnosed, because at 30, it's like you might be really glad that you caught this now, because your iron is spiking up, and we don't know why. And then the last one is a 5-year-old little girl with low iron too. So in that one, yeah. So ferritin is very misunderstood, in my opinion. People talk about like low ferritin, you got to take ferritin and all these different things. And ferritin is associated with iron, but ferritin is a protein that is made by the liver. So in my opinion, ferritin abnormalities is like, well, what's going on with your liver, first off? But then for this little girl, let's talk about her, because she had low iron, but high ferritin. It's like, how the heck does that happen? Ferritin stores iron. But ferritin's also what's called an acute phase reactant, meaning it goes up in inflammation. It goes up during inflammation. That's what I think with the 50-year-old guy. He's like, some of his heart attack risk factor markers is like, oh crap, we got to pour some water on this fire real quick. But for this girl, you can have something called anemia of chronic inflammation, meaning you're anemic. You have low hemoglobin and low iron and things like that. But you also have this elevated ferritin and all these inflammatory signs. It's also called anemia of chronic infection. And I don't know enough to, go on and on about it, but that's what it's called. It's a textbook thing. It's like a factual thing. But we see that sometimes where somebody's ferritin's elevated, but yet they're anemic. And so do we want to give that person, more iron? I don't know is my short answer, but there's a lot of different things with this hyperferritinemia. But I do agree that losing blood regularly lowers ferritin. And even, from a hospital standpoint, I had a buddy, his dad died of Lewy body dementia, and he has hemochromatosis. He has high ferritin, and he was given blood like every other week, but they weren't monitoring it. So then he started getting lightheaded and tired and stuff. He went anemic. So, but that is the medical solution, is therapeutic phlebotomy, giving blood. So women do that regularly. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question or just rambling about ferritin, Ryan, but the other thing is, like you said, you're exactly right. Ferritin and excess iron drives oxidative stress. There's something called the Fenton reaction, and you can, Google this or YouTube this or stuff. It's very well known, but it drives oxidative stress, and that's bad. And that's what rust is on a bike chain, like you said, is like it oxidizes. And that's a mechanism of aging. That's a mechanism that, shuts down cells and is just damaging in general, is oxidative stress. So in people with elevated ferritin, first off, we got to keep a look on it too, because it can change. And if sometimes somebody goes and gives blood once or twice and it comes down in the normal range, and then it kind of stays there. I just did my labs. My ferritin was surprisingly perfectly normal, whereas before it had caught my eye. It was never been lab high, but it was like, man, that's higher than I want it to be. But it was perfectly normal the last time I did labs. So it's something that with iron and hemoglobin and ferritin, one snapshot isn't adequate. You got to see a series of things to see if this is a trend or to see if this is a temporary increase or things like that. But it does drive oxidative stress. So I think it's an indication in my mind that somebody needs antioxidants like glutathione, vitamin C, alpha lipoic acid, what have you. But sometimes people need antihistamines. Sometimes they need anti-inflammatories. Sometimes they need antioxidants. And I think this is a case where they need antioxidants. But we also want to figure out like why or what's going on. And so, but a lot of different presentations of hyperferritinemia. But yeah, if you lose blood every month, you're less likely to have that. And it's very rarely, hemochromatosis, which is iron overload, is very rarely found in any women under 50, because they very rarely have hyperferritinemia because they're losing blood regularly. But then after 50, it is more common. I'll tell you, one of the things that I see too with ferritin is super involved with hair, in my opinion, like from what I've seen, because a lot of these people I've seen, they just come to me with like a problem to solve, and we're just looking for like, well, what's going on with your underlying physiology? But I've seen a lot of people, whether it's alopecia or it's hair thinning or it's like some hair loss or just like hair growth and hair changes, there's some association with ferritin and iron, and I don't know exactly what it is. It's also something too that we can go way deeper into the science behind it with like hepcidin and ceruloplasmin and these other, pathways and free iron and heme iron versus non-heme iron, and like you can get way deep into the weeds on iron, but it's still I'm into the weeds and stuff like this, but you still got to zoom out and think like, well, why or what do we need to do or what are the action steps behind this mechanism?
Yeah. It's one of those things where, and I think this holds true to most things when you're talking about a chronic health condition, that having the full picture of labs really does wonders in allowing you to be more of a sniper versus a shotgun in terms of your approach.
Exactly.
And you can be precise with how you treat things because you have the data points to do so.
Well, and I completely agree, 1000%. But I also see people all the time that come in with a bunch of labs. Like let's say they done 6 labs, and some of them are bigger targets, some of them are smaller targets, but then they've never retested them. So you've got to follow up and see, is your homocysteine coming down? Is your ferritin coming down? Is your vitamin D coming up? Is your whatever it is? But I see that missing all the time. Is that people have done, first off, let's say they did $2,000 worth of labs. And I'm like, well, you probably only needed the first 2. I'd rather see people do stool test than stool test than stool test, or oat test than oat test than oat test, or blood test than blood test than blood test. But a lot of people come in and they've tested toxins and hair tissue minerals and bugs and they're got lab fatigue. Labs are expensive, so you
Yeah.
get lab fatigue just like you get supplement fatigue. And I think that sometimes it's useful to cast a broad net. But you go to a skilled practitioner that's good with a history. That's the point of a history. I do a 90-minute intake, which is like pretty long, but I don't feel like I could go any shorter. Sometimes it's like, man, I wish we had 30 more minutes. And I've heard it said, Ryan, say if you listen to the patient long enough, they'll tell you what's wrong with them. So talking to people for a long time about all these nitpicky little things just guides us to do the best labs and start targeting the best mechanisms. And it's still trial and error, and we still don't always succeed with plan A, and we got to go to plan B and things like that. That's common in functional medicine, but we streamline it for people and guide them and say, this is what you need to do. But yeah, the whole picture and the labs are super, 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 super important.
Staying on the iron conversation, just because I think it's so fascinating. Obviously we just talked high iron and high ferritin, but then on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to anemia and low iron in general, it seems like
Really,
I'm sorry?
really important. But go ahead.
Very
Sorry.
important. And also, it seems like the traditional way it's treated, especially if you have the MTHFR gene and they're just giving you these iron pills, that there's a lot of problems and gaps there when it comes to the way that low iron's treated traditionally.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I completely agree. If you got low iron, you take iron, and I don't think that's a bad idea. I think that's smart. You need to not be anemic. Every cell in your body needs oxygen. If you don't have enough, if you're not getting it there, just nothing's going to work properly. Now, there's also too. So okay, but let's stick with iron. If somebody is low on iron, it's like, why? Are you losing it? Do you have heavy cycles? Are you bleeding internally? Things like that. But are you losing it, or are you not absorbing it? And so that's often the case. And stomach acid is necessary for the absorption of iron. So if somebody comes in and they're anemic, the first thing that I think is like, wonder what's going on with their stomach and their stomach acid. Not jumping to iron. I honestly don't use or sell that many iron supplements. Now, I'm trying to think who it was because I put somebody on one the other day that she was like alert anemic. It's like,
Mm.
okay, you need iron and we need to like follow up and things like that. But yeah, you can have, and also too, like I saw again, I'm trying to think about who these people are. Saw this kid last night. He's 8, just turned 8, and he's on an iron supplement because his iron was low. But I was like, 8-year-old boy, why is he on iron? And he's been sick. He's had a cough since October. It's February right now. He's had a cough, and I was like, I would stop the iron supplement. Iron feeds infection.
Hmm.
So iron is a fuel source for infection, and that's one of the theories behind ferritin and the anemia of chronic infection is that the body's storing the iron away so that the bugs can't get it. And then you're like have low iron because they're putting it all away. And I think that makes sense. But it's just going back to your point of like it's not as easy as just every time you take iron, or iron's perfectly safe for everybody. But I don't think that iron is a bad treatment, but there's other, cofactors, or there might be, you take beef liver and you take vitamin C that helps absorb iron, or you take, other things in the methylation, to support that too, like TMG can help with iron things. But I do think that if somebody's low, they need to be good, and if somebody's high, they also need to be good, and it's got a Goldilocks. But the other thing that I see way too often, Ryan, is B12 deficient anemia, which is pernicious anemia, which is often autoimmune. It's never tested for as autoimmune, and it's also like it's measured by your MCV. And I don't diagnose. I'm not diagnosing anybody, but it's just like, hey, this is pernicious anemia, just based on the textbook numbers. And I'll educate them on what that means and things like that. But it's B12 deficient anemia, and if you Google it, I think it would say B12 deficient anemia. But then it would say it also involves B9, B6, methylation, and I see that one, I would say, more often than iron, but it's less often talked about. And I see people too that are like, have full blown chronic fatigue, or have these like really complex health conditions, and they've been everywhere. They've been to Mayo Clinic, they've been to, you know, Harvard, or they've been to, Stanford, or they've been all these major medical facilities, and they've done a million things. They've done a million supplements and a million labs and et cetera, the type. And I'm like, well, you're anemic. Like, how are you going to heal if you're anemic? And it's not a solution for everything, but you cannot do it without it. And it makes me think of, again, the stomach, because iron is absorbed through stomach and stomach acid, and so are the B vitamins too. So pernicious anemia can often be associated with things like gastritis, and there's autoimmune markers for this. You can measure autoimmunity against the parietal cells. So the parietal cells of the stomach, just as an FYI, because this relates to autoimmunity, the parietal cells of the stomach release stomach acid and intrinsic factor. The stomach acid absorbs iron. The intrinsic factor absorbs B12. So you could test autoimmunity against parietal cells, or you could test autoimmunity against intrinsic factor, and you could check those antibodies. And sometimes we do, or sometimes people bring me those, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. But it's all like, well, we need the right amount of iron and the right amount of B vitamins, and it's Goldilocks. It's not too much, it's not too little, and there's a balance with those. That's sometimes tricky, but it's a necessary piece of anything. I kind of like vitamin D. It's like it might not solve all your problems, but you cannot do it without it.
It's a beautiful way to describe it. And I think on that same note, when it comes to iron, something that's been making a lot of headlines, and I think people are really starting to come around to realizing how big of a role the MTHFR gene plays. And in reading lab tests myself, I find that very often I'll see a correlation between high homocysteine and autoimmune symptoms, or somebody dealing with autoimmune.
Yeah.
What's your 2 cents there on what's going on, and just how big of a role the MTHFR gene and methylated B vitamins, that whole world, plays when it comes to autoimmunity?
Yeah. Well, first off, but I'm not an MTHFR hater, but it's overhyped. But I don't disagree that methylation is an important process. But I get so many people that come to me and they're like, I got one copy of, 1298 MTHFR, and like I can only detoxify at 60%. A lot of that is internet buzz.
Very much
It
so.
is not factual. Still, it's not factual, but it's a partial truth, I would say. And I just did a podcast with a geneticist. He's a PhD named Tyler Panzer, and we both, because in our world, you just start to like, MTHFR, so you start to develop a resentment towards it. But we also talked about like how important methylation is, and so that's what I would say, Ryan, is that it's incredibly important. Now, the high homocysteine is massively important. That goes back to one of with the theory of menstruation and ferritin and things like that. There is a connection. In fact, you can't see my screen, but this is a Google search that I did yesterday, and I typed it in because I knew it was factually true. And Google said, your statement described a recognized, complex, and I'm reading it. Complex pathological iron-dependent chain reaction. Elevated iron stored and released from ferritin leads to increased oxidative stress, which exhausts antioxidants like glutathione and then elevates homocysteine.
Mm-hmm.
So the elevated homocysteine is a really, 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 really important marker. But glutathione, B vitamins, methylation all play a role in its lowering. And if you look it up or you Google it, you'll see an image. It's like a flywheel of like, the methylation cycle, and that's what homocysteine is a big part of. But then that connects with the transsulfuration cycle and all these different things. But going back to your original question, MTHFR matters and genetics matter, but they're not everything. But there's also like Tyler and I on our podcast, we are both geeks about COMT. COMT is not nearly
Hey.
as famous, but it's way more like for people that recognize it, it's like, oh, you got COMT issues and not MTHFR issues. But almost any gene with an M in it is a methylation gene. PEMT is a phosphatidylcholine gene that's really common. HNMT is a histamine methylating gene. Histidine N methyltransferase. So a lot of these genes, methylation's involved with like so much. Methylation is one carbon metabolism, which is like every single thing in your body. So it's like it's hard to be like, oh, you don't detox well, And people come into me and they have these preconceived notions of like, well, I don't detox well because I got one MTHFR. I'm like, well, those two things are not the same, and let's look at it and see. But going back to the question, it matters a ton, but it's also really, really tricky to find the solution and the right thing, And Tyler and I talked about it that a lot of times methyl Bs, people read about MTHFR and they go out and they take methyl Bs and it makes it worse. So that's their answer is like, well, that's not helping you and it might be hurting you, but it's not a bad thing to try. But I see people, again, this lady yesterday with the high ferritin, she also had high homocysteine. Two of the three people, two of the three people I mentioned, not the 5-year-old girl, but three of the four maybe also have high homocysteine. So we see that commonly for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. But and homocysteine damages the arteries. It's a heart attack risk factor for sure. It's an Alzheimer's risk factor. It damages the arteries, so it's like not good. But it's lowered through this methylation process, and again, and I think that the connection in my mind, Ryan, is like I just said, high ferritin and high iron drive oxidative stress. So do cigarette smoke and alcohol and air pollution and basically most of the bad things, but they drive oxidative stress and that depletes our antioxidants.
Mm-hmm.
And then that leaves us more susceptible to methylation defects, or you're using up all your B vitamins, you're using up all your glutathione, and so there's this weird biochemical connection. I think the point is that it's real easy for somebody to get on Instagram or YouTube and be like, this is the wheel, this is how it connects, and this is your MTHFR, and it's an important piece. But how does that help sick people get well? And it's not nearly as clear. So sometimes, like there's a girl that was texting me this morning, she's a nurse practitioner, and when she stopped her methyl Bs, it was a game changer.
Hmm.
So sometimes it's methyl Bs, sometimes it's unmethylated Bs. There's all kinds of different combos of like folinic acid is sometimes a better form of folate for certain people than L5-MTHF, which is more trendy and famous and things like that. Or some methylation supports have like 3,000 micrograms of B12, and it's like that's massive. And sometimes that works. Sometimes they can get somebody that's suicidally depressed and get them out of the psych ward or things like that. They'll use these in inpatient settings is my point. Like but sometimes it make people have anxiety or insomnia, and it's like that's not your key. So there's a lot of people that I see. That's a good question too, Ryan, because I got more of a strong opinion. A lot of times my opinion's like pretty benign, like, man, it's not good, it's not bad. This is what I feel like about it with red light or, athletic greens or any of those things. But with that one, there's often a methylation piece to these puzzles. But B9 isn't always the key that unlocks that door. It might be SAMe, or it might be some other missing piece, or it might be, getting out of mold, or it might be like, whatever it is. But I've got a lot of opinion on MTHFR, and I think it is important, but it's not any more important than MTRR or some of the others. And somebody genetically, I'm not looking at the genetic flow chart right now, but some of those others just play a role in it. I'll just leave it at that. But so it matters. But COMT, I think, and I'm more keen on COMT too because I got bad ones, and so does Tyler Banzer, and so do a lot of people that are high energy and don't clear out their catecholamines as quickly. They don't clear out dopamine or adrenaline and epinephrine and things. That's what COMT stands for. But we can see that a lot more clearly clinically. MTHFR, I do think is involved, and I do think that some of the buzzwords about it too, last thing I'll say, is if somebody comes into me thinking like I don't detoxify very well, that's an advantage to me because I'm like, good, let's detox. You know what I mean? But
Makes it
but I
easy.
don't know that it's factually true. But sometimes we'll measure a toxin test, and somebody's got 19 toxins, somebody's got 25 toxins, or somebody's got, like another story I tell a lot is this girl that had gadolinium in her toxin test, and I know she's had a lot of MRIs, and this was recent. And I was like, when was your last MRI? She said 2019. I said, okay, well, you still got gadolinium in your body because we're measuring it on your urine. So then we might say, yeah, you got MTHFR. Maybe that's not why you're clearing things or whatever else. But I don't just jump right to it, and I don't test for it either. And
Hmm.
with in the world of Gary Brecka's and things like that, I get so many people that are texting me like, I think I got MTHFR. I think I need to get it tested. And I told somebody this yesterday. They were like, that's really famous right now. And I said, it's famous again. This ain't not its first time in the spotlight. Things catch waves in the functional world, and keto diet's kind of not as much in vogue as it was 5, 10 years ago. It will come back, and some of these things just go in waves. MTHFR is a wave right now, and like detox drainage pathways, parasites. We could see these waves. Um, but anyway, that's it. I'll stop there.
Yeah, oftentimes they just change names, right? It's like at first it was the Atkins wave, and then it turns into the keto wave, and it essentially it's the same thing, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
definitely go in these waves. One thing that this whole conversation has revolved around nuance, and so much of what we are talking about depends on you taking a very nuanced approach to your health because there's not one way to skin the cat, and there is a trillion different things that could be, causing the symptoms that you might be experiencing. And it seems like there's one blanket thing that so many people will just recommend off the bat, and it kind of goes over the nuance, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're safe just doing this." But my suspicion, based on what we're talking about, is that this is far from the case, and that is a multivitamin, the good old multivitamin. What's your thoughts on just taking a daily multi?
I'm a little bit of a hater. I don't hate it. Don't get me wrong, but it's fine. People do it because they think people want to be active. They want to be proactive and they don't want to die and they want to live long and all these things. So it makes you feel like you're doing something. And it's good. We need vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. So I'm not saying it's bad at all. We sell multivitamins, but in my world of like getting sick people well, it's almost never used. So, and I always draw this drawing, Ryan, where it's like 3 columns and it's like short term, middle term, and long term. In the long term, it's good to have all your vitamins and minerals and nutrients and micronutrient needs covered. So I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of taking them. I'm a fan of trying to get them from your diet first would be my first opinion. Because then you're getting all the fiber and the antioxidants, all the bright colors and strong flavors and things like that. But that would be in the long term. So if you want to do it, great, cool, knock yourself out. We got one. Come buy it from us if you want. But otherwise, getting sick people well, it doesn't solve any problems. And so a lot of times we're looking for, well, where are there problems to solve? So that might be in a long term. I also put in the long term things like vitamin D
Mm.
and omega 3s, which are two things that I think are just like so incredibly important. The literature supports that. Like there's no controversy about it, I don't think. But how many people know their omega number? How many people know their vitamin D level, not have seen it once, but know it? And how many people know it and know that it's over, 70? Like the numbers get fewer and fewer and fewer each time we bring these things up. But that is, I think, is such a super important thing for almost, and the reason is long term. It's good for a kid. It's good in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your 70s. It's good if you want to avoid Alzheimer's. It's good if you want to avoid cancer. It's good if you want to avoid heart disease. I mean, it's just like you can't even, talk about how good it is because it's so multifactorial. And same thing with omegas. And I'd say vitamin D is probably more famous than omegas. Not many people know their omega check, but it's necessary for the resolution of inflammation. So in an autoimmune world, and going back to our talk about sleep and the different buckets and hoses and things, a lot of it's inflammation, but that inflammation has to be able to resolve, and you can't do it without good omega levels. So I think those are more long term, but so that's where again I would put a multivitamin. But it's harder to measure vitamin levels. Some people come into me and they're like, I just want to know my vitamin levels so I know what to take. Like, yeah, that'd be really fun if we could do that. And there's different tests like SpectraCell, which can do intracellular vitamins. And I used to use SpectraCell for a while. I don't anymore, and I can tell you why and things like that. But it's just not that easy of like, where's my vitamin and mineral levels? But we want them and we need them. They're cofactors for all the things our body does. But in the middle term, or let's say in the short term, in that drawing that I do, short term symptoms. If you're inflamed and you take anti-inflammatories, sometimes you feel a lot better in a couple days. If you've got a lot of histamine and you take or antihistamine supporting supplements, a lot of times you feel a lot better in a couple days. And so that's short term. Like when there's a fire, here's the extinguisher. Put it out. But the middle term is where a lot of the work happens in a functional wellness office. And it's like gut health, which again, as we talked about at the beginning of this, there's a lot of things, do we need to pull weeds, plant seeds, heal leaky gut? How long is it going to take? Avoid foods, But let's say we work on your gut for 3 or 4 months. Great. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't have to do it forever. The other middle term is detox, which is again, like you don't have to do it forever, but for 3 or 4 months, we might be, detoxing. Even the lady that I told some of these stories, but one of the ladies I saw yesterday with the homocysteine and ferritin, a lot of her things were improving. Her kidney filtration rate had been 51, her GFR. She's seeing, she's, got a medical provider that does her prescriptions, and she's seeing, other people besides me too. So I'm not diagnosing or treating these things, but her GFR was 51. She did a detox for 2 months, and her GFR is now 71. And she was like, I think it was the cleanse. And that makes sense. There's kidney support in the cleanse. But we could see these markers, but it's middle term. You do it for some time, and you're not doing it on Tuesday if you feel great, or on Wednesday you feel like crap. You're still detoxing. You're just like stay in the course and trust in the process. But those are more middle term things. So anyway, going back to your question of multivitamin, I don't take one. I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's harmful by any means. I don't think you're doing any harm by taking one, but it's more like looking at some of these other puzzle pieces with gut and symptoms of short term, and then D and omegas. And so in my opinion, that there's just no room for a multi when there's already 6 other things in your medicine cabinet. But it's not, if somebody's in maintenance and they're like feeling really good, great idea. And I'm a fan of like even, just to name drop, like Rhonda Patrick. I like Rhonda Patrick quite a bit, and she's a PhD. She's very well read and researched, but she talks about micronutrients, and so it makes sense. But I'm not as big of a fan of them as, I don't know, you might think.
I want to talk about those kind of those big name supplements, if you will. I want to break down omega-3s, vitamin D, and magnesium. And let's start with omega-3s, which is one thing that is a bit controversial. I think it's becoming a little bit more controversial in the sense of rancidity. I guess that would be the word. Or omega-3s going rancid, and that ending up being a net negative in the end. So what are your thoughts with just omega-3 supplementation as a whole? I think people understand that if they get their labs done and their omega balance is in check and it's good, then that is an amazing thing. But when it comes to the supplementation side of things, I think people have a little bit of confusion with how to get those levels where they should be.
Yeah. So let me tell you a couple things. First off, the omega test that I use the most often now, we just started using it, is a finger prick. It's called an Omega Quant, and it was developed by this guy Bill Harris, who's one of the top dogs in the omega research world. And so he's been on Rhonda Patrick's, podcast many times and stuff. But the solution after you listen to him is a lot of times like you need to take fish oil and you need to take a lot of it. There's also, and then another thing with getting your numbers up is it can take a long time of high doses. And I share documents with people. I like sharing documents with people, Ryan, because sometimes it's like, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's where I learned this. And if you don't do this, it ain't going to work, So there's the one that I share with people that says it can take 4 grams a day for up to 3 months. And it says for this to shift the numbers. And it says in there, it says it could take 3 months to shift the patient's biology. Don't expect a patient to say they felt better in a week. So I just tell people that because it's like, hey, if you're going to do 4 of these a day, and let's say there's 120 of them in there, it's like this bottle is going to last you a month, and then you need another bottle, and then you need another bottle, and then we can retest. So it takes a lot. So it doesn't move that quickly.
And
But
4 grams a
then,
day is a quite higher dose than I think most bottles recommended dose.
absolutely. Now,
Significantly.
many people in the functional space take 6 grams, 7 grams. Even a guy that I'll post in a podcast soon, Dr. Ben White's, he said he takes 6 or 7 grams. So I think people that are savvy to this are like, no, I'm doing 4. I'm doing more than that. But most people are doing like, yeah, I take a fish oil every day. And then we measure, and their omega check's like 3. It's like that's low. We used to send them off to Cleveland Clinic and do their omega check through LabCorp. I don't know if LabCorp stopped carrying it or if our vendor stopped carrying it, but we can't access it anymore. So now we do this finger prick.
Yeah,
But
I think
so I've seen
it's
a
LabCorp.
million. What?
I think it's LabCorp that's the issue. They side note, but they're trying to get into their own like direct to consumer world. So they've kind of starting to try to distance themselves from practitioners and people selling these tests so that they can enter into that world. But side
Yeah.
note,
Well,
back to the main thing.
it is a side note, but it's also interesting because I love like when sales reps come in and talk about their supplements. I like, you ain't gonna pitch me on any supplements. We talk about industry gossip a lot as we talk about like who's selling out, who's doing what, who's coming out with new products, and I love that. Same thing in the lab world. I mean, for right or wrong or better or worse, everyone's trying to make a buck. And sometimes that leads to cutting corners and things like that too. And that's actually a good segue to talk about the supplements because fish oil is very easily rancid and very easily oxidized. Most oils are. That's why olive oil is always in a green bottle or a brown bottle or things like that, usually green, because the sun will oxidize it. And all oils can be oxidized very easily, and some are more stable than others. And even with olive oil versus avocado oil and some of these others, it might be like their smoke point is like how easily they oxidize. But fish oil is very easily oxidized. So, and I don't know, the reputable brands, but my suggestion to anybody is like, don't take a crap one. But the reputable brands, a lot of them, they extract the fish oil like right on the shore of where the boats come in. Like the factory is right there. It's not like the fish are being shipped to Chicago and then they're making this fish oil and it's a 10-step process. It's like, no, we got to get this in quick and we got to get it stable. And they take that into account. And so without even naming any particular safe brands or things like that, and I will, I'm not supposed to, but like I just think getting one at Costco or Walmart or just a lower price one is just like a risk that I wouldn't take. Now, I would say, Ryan, for vitamin D, I don't know that that's the case. Vitamin D might be the same at Walgreens or Costco. I'm sure there's some additives or other things, but it's also cost-wise, it's not going to be that much cheaper to get it from Walgreens or Costco than it is from a pharmacy because they're probably the same. They're pretty close. But the fish oil might be half the price. If you get it from Walgreens, it might be half the price from me or half the price from a pharmacy. So, some people will be like, hey, I ain't paying for this. I'm going to get the cheaper one. but the quality absolutely matters. One of the things that I do that people think is nasty, and I thought it was nasty when I first heard it too, but I had a sales rep have me do this, and it's called the bite test. And so and I show people all the time. I take a fish oil and I chomp it, and I just swallow it, and I spit the capsule out. That's how I take fish oil. I
Wow.
almost never swallow them. But the point of that test was that it's not rancid. Because if it's
You
rancid, you can
taste it.
taste it, smell it, you can burp it. And so when I do this with the trustworthy omega that I take, it tastes fine, and I actually prefer it. But you can chomp them and not swallow them. But you want a high quality source. And again, just to list, I don't know if we want to say names, but like I think Nordic Natural is a good brand. I think Orthomoleculars is the one that I use the most. It's called
Mm.
Orthomega. And then it's just dosaging too. But in my office, we probably carry like, I carry a wide variety of supplements. So I might have, 6 vitamin Ds and things like that. But with omegas, we don't have that many. We have like 1 or 2 or 3. I've got another one that's pre-emulsified. So it's a liquid. So it might be less upsetting for somebody with SIBO issues or gut issues because it's already broken down. It's pre-emulsified. But it's harder to get those 4 gram a day doses. So it's always a trade-off of like high dose, low dose, cofactors, who there's a person. So, and I think again, coming back to the word nuance, like that's probably the theme of my practice. And it's also too, Ryan, that's what I've learned from my mentors is like no two people are the same. And one fish oil might not work for one person, but it might work for another. Or if it's a little kid who can't swallow a big horse pill, what are we going to give them? We got to find a liquid. And,
Yeah.
so what are we doing, with the dosaging or what the, levels and things like that. But I do think that the quality matters and the rancidity is part of that. Now, I thought you were going to say too, because this got trendy. I don't know. I'm getting old enough that it's like I got to think about how long ago it was. But like omega-3 dominance, that was like a flash in the pan, I would say. But I think that loud voices get attention. So I think that sometimes people are talking about it and they got attention, but I don't know that it's that real. And the overwhelming like tens of thousands of studies show how important omega-3s are for resolving inflammation and what they turn into too. And I could go on about this like pro-resolving mediators, specialized pro-resolving mediators, another thing you could take as a supplement, but it's particularly helpful for inflammation, and that's a different topic than. But omegas convert into these pro-resolving mediators. But now I forget where I was going with that. But I just totally blanked on where I was going
Well,
with that. But
let me. I think this
yeah,
might lead
you
to
guide me,
that
Ryan.
because of omega sixes. Everyone knows
Yeah,
omega
the
six.
omega-3 dominance. That's what it was. Go ahead.
Okay, so well, that's what I was gonna. So I was gonna say omega sixes, and um, I know that they are essential. You need omega sixes to live. However, omega six dominance as well seems like that's a whole nother conversation as the world of seed oils becomes bigger and bigger, and everyone likes to call seed oils the devil and think of seed oils as one of the worst things that you can be eating on a consistent basis, and they're so hard to detox, and they store in your fat, and you have them forever, and you can never get them where you need to be. One interesting thing is that I was curious about is like how important it is, like the ratios of those two versus just having it in general. What's your whole thoughts when it comes to omega sixes and this whole world of seed oils and
Yeah.
all that fun stuff?
Well, I would say that a lot of things I've said today fit into this, thought process is like loud voices get heard. So it's something that people are talking about a lot. It's a trendy topic and it's a hot topic on YouTube and on the internet. And I don't disagree. I mean, we've talked about it for years of like trans fats and all the, other bad oils and omega-6 to 3 ratio. I first started doing this measuring omega-6 to 3 ratios. It was like the first thing I ever did functionally, meaning first lab test. I used to do it on everybody. And I organic acid tests and omega-3 and 6 testing. And at one point, I'm talking 10 years ago, I averaged, you know, 20 of my patient labs. And I think our average was 20 to 1 with
Wow.
6 to 3. And so one of the solutions is reduce the sixes, eat less seed oils, which I think you should. One of the solutions is also raise the threes. So you want to do both. And now I'll say, even as we talk about the testing and things, the Cleveland Clinic omega check looked at the 6-to-3 ratio. The newer one that we're doing just looks at the threes. So, and I don't think it's as thorough. I mean, it's just less data, but it's more just like you need more omega threes or you're good on omega threes. So it doesn't give us as much, but that ratio matters. That ratio matters for the resolution of inflammation. And there's all these different, papers and different theories about in different tissues have different ratios, like the brain versus the heart, but it's usually like 4-to-1 or 6-to-1 or 3-to-1 and sometimes 1-to-1. 6-to-1 might be the most. But again, if my patients all averaged 20 or 30-to-1, it's like, well, that's what's happening. And that's also what happens too when they measure grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef, because you feed a cow a lot of grains, and that's a lot of the omega 6s and things like that. It gets fatter quicker. That's good for the farmer, but it also gets sicker quicker too, and then it needs hormones and antibiotics. But that's kind of the selling point of grass-fed versus grain-fed is this omega 6-to-3 ratio. Now, some of this, Ryan, I'm going off of memory from 10 years ago when I used to talk about it more, but I still think it's massively important. But I think that the omega 3s, I don't know which is more important. If you ask me what's more important, taking fish oil and getting your omega 3s up or avoiding seed oils, I think the threes, because they're cardioprotective, they're neuroprotective, the resolution of inflammation cannot occur without these pro-resolving mediators. But I think that seed oils are also bad too. And the lipid balance, sixes, threes, I don't know, other lipids in the body, but they make up the cell membranes. And it matters a lot for membrane fluidity. We want our cell membranes to be fluid. We want our cell membranes to be talking to each other. We want them to be flexible. So having that good ratio is really, 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 really important. But sometimes it might be take more threes. Sometimes it might be avoid more sixes. But just getting that ratio in check is important. But I don't get as nitpicky with the numbers as I used to. I'm just like, yeah, you should be avoiding those things in general. Because in general, I always say, eat food by God, not food by man. So, and let's just pick on canola oil. It's easy to pick on, but there's no canola plant. It stands for, I think it's Canadian oil low acid. So it's an acronym, but it comes from rapeseed, but it's made in this really high heat process and made in this high heat process. And I say, you think about an olive and how easy it is to smash an olive and get oil out of it. It's easy. You take a little seed, it requires a lot of pressure and a lot of heat and a lot of friction, and that oxidizes the oil.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to the oxidization, it all matters, and people do this because they're trying to make a buck. So it cuts corners, and they can save some money because rapeseed oil and canola oil is a lot cheaper to probably produce and manufacture than fresh pressed olive oil and things like that. So there's all these different, industry, reasons why this, came into practice, but it's just you avoid that if you're eating real food.
Yeah, and I highly recommend everyone watch a video on how the canola or the rapeseed plant, which is that was a great idea to rename that one because that is not a great name. But
what's the new name?
The canola, well, calling it canola oil versus rapeseed oil. I highly recommend someone watch the process of getting that from the seed itself to the shelf because it is a very long, very industrialized process, very aligned with what you were saying from food from God versus food by man. But I want to
or food that grew on a plant versus food that was made in a plant too. Same concept, but yeah,
that's
real
that's
food.
a clever one. And next one is vitamin D, and I think there's a very key distinction about vitamin D from the sun and vitamin D from a supplement. When it comes to vitamin D in general, what are the key things we should be thinking about?
That in my opinion, same thing with red light therapy or things like that. The perfect light is the sun. the perfect D source is the sun. And I don't think it's something we need to be hiding from. We don't want to fry and get burned either, but it's like, the sun is pretty sticking important to everything, right? Like the world evolves around it, and the food chain is based off of it. And it's like, that's no mistake. But I also think I see people all the time, and let's say it's like, August, and it's a girl that comes in a tank top and she's tan, and we measure her vitamin D and it's like 30. Well, then there's a lot of mystery to that too, of like, well, do you need to go and get more sun, or what is the solution? Because they might be getting plenty of sun, but they just still might be low. And there's a lot of science that talks about the vitamin D receptor. In fact, I thought it was interesting on my last podcast with Tyler Panzer, the geneticist. He said if somebody's got a lot of SNPs in their vitamin D receptor genetics, they might need their levels to be 70 to 80.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas somebody that doesn't have as many SNPs might be fine at 40, 50 because they don't need as much vitamin D to tickle that vitamin D receptor. The vitamin D receptor alone is just really, 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 really fascinating. And there's some ties with, methylation and things like that. But I think in general, there's a lot of things we can get into about that, of like, oh, this is best, or this is best, or this is best. But in general, I'm more like zoom out and like, what's your level? And if it's not good, you got to get it up. And that might be taking 50,000 IUs. That might be doing a sun lamp or things like that. I got a vitamin D lamp. I got a Spurdy lamp, 10 steps away here. But I don't do it that often, but I think that the natural is better than taking it orally, but it's whatever gets that number up, because even from an autoimmune standpoint, that's what's been shown to be the most, is like people below this number are worse off. People that are above this number are better off. So I'm more of a numbers guy. But then there's talk about D2 versus D3 and all these different things, and you can measure all that. But it's just where you lose me is like, does it matter? And what matters is more like where your level's at. And I see people all the time that are like, I don't know, 9, 17, 23, or they take it and they're like, good news, you're no longer deficient. You're 35. I'm like, well, that is not that good. You're just no longer insufficient. I saw one story that I loved. This is 2 summers ago, I want to say. And this girl's a lifeguard. She's had it at the pool all summer. She'd never taken vitamin D. Hers was like 101 or something. And so that would be ideal, Ryan, if we could all go out and be lifeguards. It's like, that might be ideal. Or,
Sounds like
we're working in our farms with like our ancestors, or working outside. We'd wear a hat, wear shirts and stuff like that too, but you're still going to be higher from an outdoor lifestyle. But a lot of us have jobs and things like that where it's like, hey, I can't be outside during the peak hours of the day. But I think the sun is by far the best, but it's a numbers game to me.
Let us know in the comments if you want us to do a whole conversation just about sunlight, because I think that is a conversation we could talk about all day and go in a million different directions with. So let us know in the comments if that's something that'd be interesting to you guys.
I don't follow him nearly as much, but I used to say, like, I don't know if you know Jack Cruz.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I do.
I used to say, this was like 10 years ago, and I'd be like, I'm 400 hours into Jack Cruz info, and I'm barely scratching the surface. I have listened to like so many hours of Jack Cruz. I love him too. He's a little bit controversial and opinionated and crazy, and he's kind of just a jerk, really. But
that's true.
It's not untrue, all the things he says, and the sun and the way that it works on our mitochondria. That's why vitamin D is trendy. That's why red light therapy is trendy. That's why a lot of these things are trendy, is because they're factually true, but the sun is the best source. But again, I'm not, giving up my modern, lifestyle and going and living in a, cave with my family. That might be good, but we're just not doing that. So yeah, and as I sit here with all these like lights around me and stuff too, it's like Jack Cruz would hate me.
Me too. I got a little.
And he hates people that sell supplements anyway. He would not like me, but whatever.
He doesn't like a lot of people, so
exactly. And he turns a lot of people off too. But he's the smartest guy I've ever heard talk.
I was supposed to do a podcast with him, and I got a little overly intimidated. I didn't feel like I was in my realm. I didn't think I was educated enough.
Sometimes he's real nice to the host. Sometimes he's real rude to the host.
It's a mixed bag. Maybe we'll get him on here one day. But let's shift gears to talking about magnesium because everyone sees the figures on the internet going on about magnesium is essential for 350 different elements of the body or parts of the body or processes of the body, I should say. But when it comes to magnesium, is it something, that seems like it's one that almost everyone could benefit from supplementing with. What are your just general thoughts when it comes to magnesium and obviously how important of a role it plays and when we should think about supplementing with magnesium?
Well, I will say that again, I agree that everybody's talking about it and the different, mechanisms. And I've got the Carolyn Dean book, the original magnesium book from, however long ago that talks about the 300 processes in the body and how necessary it is. But I also question like why? Why is it deficient or why is it bad or why is it low or things like that? But I don't think it's a bad idea. But in general, and I'm looking at something, Ryan, so I'll tell you what it is in a sec. I was just kind of confirming
No
it. But
worries.
there's also, so that's one talk is like, this is how important it is. I've also heard some people talking recently about like, this is why everyone's hooked on magnesium and they can't get off it. And why as soon as they get off it, all their symptoms return and they're like
Mm.
kind of bad mouthing magnesium, which again, loud voices get heard. So the majority of the voices talk good about fish oil. Sometimes people are like, fish oil could be bad. So the majority of the voices talk about how good magnesium is. Sometimes magnesium could be bad in theory, I guess, but I don't think it's ever bad. But one of the things that I would just talk about is like, because I'm not a fan of like everybody needs it. It's more like why.
Hmm.
But even in a cell danger response is getting to be more trendy, and it's an awesome theory. And I've got a video about it if you're ever curious about this. But it's a theory about like when your cells are in danger, what do they do? And it's almost like when a turtle's in danger, what does it do? Pulls its head in the turtle shell. And the author of the papers that theorized this, he has a quote that I memorized, but it's like he says, when cells are at war, they behave the way nations do. They harden their borders and don't trust their neighbors. And then the cells stop talking to each other and the cell to cell communication goes down. And it's all crazy because it's all like, it's this unifying theory of, because like even Jack Kruse stuff is all mitochondria. This is all mitochondria. The mitochondria are what sense danger or sense safety. And then they're, communicating with each other. But anyway, part of the cell danger response is magnesium wasting. Magnesium wasting. So you think about like, why does somebody need so much magnesium? I don't know. Or why are they not getting it from their diet? I don't know. Like, shouldn't they be? And yeah, a supplement can solve that, but like, why? And I think of the danger response. And so, not like I can say an example, Ryan, of like, we fixed this person's cell danger response and they no longer needed magnesium. But instead of saying, like, yeah, everybody needs magnesium, I'm more like, well, why would they? And another interesting thing with this cell danger response, I mean, if you look at it, it's fascinating because it's all the things that come into a functional medicine office. You're going to have adrenal fatigue. You're going to have dysbiosis of the gut. You're going to need magnesium. You're going to have anxiety. You're going to have low vitamin D. You're going to have all these different things. You're going to have methylation issues. And so you could take magnesium and B vitamins and vitamin D and probiotics, and somebody comes in with 12 supplements like everybody we see. But the solution is more like, well, where's the danger? How do we get the body out of this danger response? Because the dangers are molds, metals, pesticides, bugs, infections, COVIDs, Lymes, stress, traumatic upbringings, which we know are associated with autoimmunity and things like that. But if we just think about how do we get the body to safety, it zooms out away from magnesium. So I know that wasn't a very clear answer. Now, with that being said, I own a supplement store. We sell a boatload of magnesium, right? So we got glycinate, we got, citrate, we got oxides, we got, threonate for the brain, and people love it and they swear by it. So I'm not trying to, deter people from buying supplements from my supplement store. But that's more my question. If a sick person is coming to me to try to get well, it's more like, well, why do you need that? I use magnesium the most often for me for bowel motility. If somebody's constipated, we're trying to, activate their vagus nerve or things like that. It's like magnesium and vitamin C are will move the bowels at some magnitude, at some dosage. But it is good for everything. So some people are like, I swear by it for my headaches or my restless leg. And I might also a lot of times, Ryan, use it in a blend. So like a lot of times there's a blend that I use that supports GABA pathways. GABA
Mm.
pathways is calming the nervous system. So this blend it's literally our number one best-selling supplement. We carry like 500 supplements. It's our number one best-selling supplement, but it has magnesium in it. But it has like 10 milligrams. So if
Very
you look
smart.
at that and you're like, if you know anything about magnesium, it's like that's nothing. But why does it help? I don't know, but it helps, and people swear by it, and people love it, and it's our number one best-selling supplement. But it's calming for the nervous system. So again, a very nuanced answer to a very common question, but also one that I think that a lot of people like. I could sucker, and I mean that in the best way, but I could sucker people into buying magnesium by posting about the what it does and the importance of it. And then I might sell, 10 more bottles and things like that. But like why? Why are we so deficient? And you read like, oh, it's the soil is depleted and all
That's what
these
I was going to
things.
ask.
Yeah, and I don't think that those are untrue. So there's a lot of things I think in the wellness world that aren't untrue, but they don't also answer all the questions of like the magnesium wasting and things like that. But I'm not opposed to magnesium, and might I probably like have one in my medicine cabinet at home. I'm sure it's probably my wife's, but a lot of people take it and they feel better. So anything that helps relieve human suffering, I'm like, cool, great, keep taking it. But then we think about why, and we try to eliminate the need for it too.
Very interesting. Yeah, my mind with supplementation in general, when people are like, why do you need a supplement? The argument my brain always goes to immediately is just, we have diminished soil quality and the amount of, I think the argument I always see was like the amount of vitamin C that you would need to get from one orange that your grandpa had growing up would be the equivalent of like 4 oranges today or something along those lines. So that's always my initial thought when I think of supplementation is like modern world, kind of modern problems, if you will.
Well,
Um,
and I think, Ryan, I agree, but it's also like the decreased vitamin availability, but also the increased toxicity from the modern world, but both modern world problems, but it's just not as easy to come by as it was for our grandfathers or whatever. I was thinking about that with something else you said. I don't remember what it was, but like seed oils or one of the things, but some of these things, I got a 98-year-old grandpa who's it's not like he's avoided seed oils and avoided some of these things for all his life. But I and so but other my dad passed away and he had healthy lifestyles and stuff. So some of these things are just a mystery of like, is this actually going to kill me sooner? Or it doesn't really matter for longevity, but I think all those little drops are drops in the bucket. So I think they all matter. But they're I don't want to say oversold, but it's just like oversold might be a fair word. They're overly sold for the people that are magnesium salesmen. It's like magnesium is, the key. Or people that are multivitamin salesmen too. It's like, well, the soil is depleted and we need all these nutrients. And again, I am a salesman of supplements. Literally, I own a supplement store, but I'm still a big, like a why thinker. And I think of toxins and gut health as being the big whys, really.
with that said, listening to this conversation, my one thing that sticks out to me is just the being more calculated with your supplement use and going about it based on data and not just like, oh, on Instagram they told me magnesium good, so I take magnesium. So going about it with a more dialed in perspective is kind of one of the takeaways I've had from listening to this conversation. How do you think we get there when it comes to like, our supplementation and what we should be taking? How do we determine, what supplements we should be taking on a daily basis.
My number one answer is going to be like work with somebody like me, because a lot of people that I've seen for years, they know how to do this. That's why I don't see them that often, because if they get a flare, they might ramp up their anti-inflammatories and get out of that flare, and then they're back to baseline. I had this girl one time, I'll tell a story. She has Crohn's. She's doing great. She was doing great. The last time I saw her, she was like, I'm doing great. My mom just said I should check in with you. So I was like, okay, sweet. Let's check it. But every time she's felt her gut gets inflamed, she takes turmeric and resveratrol. And she's like, it makes it go away. I was like, good. That's what they're for. But she was like, how long do they last? Because they've been in my fridge for a long time. And I'm like, that's great, because that's a sign that you don't need them that often. But you teach people how to use a fire extinguisher. And it doesn't mean they're never going to have fires. It means they're never going to burn the house down. Because if the fire creeps up, they extinguish it. And then the house never burns down. So I think that over time, I've got little, teaching tools and things like that I try to teach people with, Ryan. But one of the things we'll draw, and again, it's hard to do, without drawing it, but it's like at the beginning, we're trying to get, to a place of maintenance or whatever. And that requires what I call macro cycles. A lot of supplements for a long time. We might be gut healing for 3 months. We might be detoxing for 3 months. And, you're doing all these subs, and what's the intention and the purpose and the biochemistry and things like that. But you should eventually get to a place where you feel improved. And then you can do a lot with micro cycles. So I do a lot of these, teach people how to do these micro cycles. And I'm like, hey, those gut supplements that you took for 3 months, those are still good. You just might need to take, let's say you go on vacation and you're eating out and you're drinking more and you're like, just living your life a little bit, and you come back, and even if you feel fine, it's like do a 1 week microcycle to get your gut back on track, just because you disrupted it. A lot of times, if you don't even feel worse, but you're just doing it because you did that. Or let's say another one is like, if you're going to run a marathon, it's like you better be taking anti-inflammatories afterward. You're going to be inflamed. It's just par for the course. It's just what comes with it. And if you know how to control those mechanisms, that's more my thing. And so we teach people. And again, you said the word data, which I don't disagree with, but it's like, I would say it's research-based, because it's not always numbers of how turmeric helps inflammation. But there's a boatload of studies out there that say that. There's a boatload of studies that say that turmeric and resveratrol together are better than turmeric and resveratrol separate. So I might tell people, hey, let's take turmeric and resveratrol and let's see if they help. And if they come back and they're like, yeah, they helped, I'm like, good. Keep them in your fridge. Keep them in your medicine cabinet. This is how you use those. So it's understanding these mechanisms, understanding, because a lot of these things, they're, and the mentors that I've learned from, they're very well researched. Nobody's just like, hey, you should take this because I read about it. They're like, there's study after study after study of like, this is the mechanism and this helps influence that mechanism. But it's also too, like one of my mentors, Dr. Karazian, this is a recurring theme in functional. It's not just him, but he said one time, he's like, how do you know, we know these compounds work on these mechanisms. How do you know how much somebody needs? He's like, when you fill your hand and it feels like enough, add some more. So a lot of times we're doing the right thing, we're just underdosing. And I've heard that from seminar after seminar after seminar. It's like, these things work, just don't underdose them. And a lot of times the bottle might say, take 2 a day. And I'm telling people like, hey, you might need to take 12 a day or things like that, which obviously I'm not trying to say on the internet that anybody should go out and do that. But it's just factually true of, if we want to, affect a mechanism, sometimes we need more, but then once we've affected it, we don't need it. So I have a lot of people that take anti-inflammatories, and it might be take 12 a day only when they're inflamed. And then they don't take 2 every day. So it's understanding these mechanisms, understanding what the tools are available and what they're doing, of like, hey, brain fog is, we want to improve oxygenation to your brain. And that's what this supplement is for. So for the month of February, take this supplement and let me know next month if your brain fog got better. And if it got better, we're going to stick with that. Sticking with this, and I'm rambling a little bit, but one time I had this girl, she was taking a supplement for brain fog. And she texted me and she's like, my brain fog's not any better. And I was like, try doubling it. And she texted me 5 days later and she was like, this has been the best 5 days I've had in a long time. So sometimes it's like, just try taking more. And if it doesn't work, we're never going to buy that one again. But if it works, she probably still takes it, but that's what we're trying to figure out is, well, what is your mechanism? What are we aiming at? What are the tools available? What are the doses required? And then we try it and we see if it works. And I've got a million stories like that of it working or not working or plan B working when plan A didn't work. But that's what we try to do, I would say.
Well, and I think that might sound crazy to most people and you're like, oh my God, like it sounds a little intimidating. But let's just take the omega-3 example because it's a very simple, very makes sense in this situation, right? If we've seen, like you said, your mentors in the literature suggest 4 grams a day. 4 grams of omega-3s. A lot of the bottles are 500 milligrams.
Exactly.
So in order to get the 4 grams that the scientific literature is suggesting is the optimal dose, you need to take 8 pills, And so it might seem like you're taking 8 times the suggested dose, but the suggested dose is just off from what is actually being told.
Exactly. Like I saw this other girl, she had her vitamin D was, let's say it was like 19. And she was like, I started taking it. I'm taking 1,000 IUs a day. And I'm like, that your vitamin D might go down. it definitely is not going to go up. And so I put her on, the doses I put her on were like, a lot more than that. But a lot of times, even if you find the problem, you go out and you buy a vitamin D. You go out and you buy a fish oil. You follow the label. Like, why am I not feeling better? The internet says I should be. And you're missing something. You're just not doing it right. And that's why it's a numbers game. It's like if 1,000 gets it up, great, take 1,000. But if it doesn't, you better take 20,000, 50,000. You got to take a lot more and it won't get it up. But I see people. I saw this guy one time. It disappointed me so much because he's really inflamed, massively inflamed, like in a lot of pain and like really struggling. And his omegas were super low. His D was super low. And I was like, we got to start there. So he's not going to fix your problems, but we got to start there. But then he kind of said a few months later, like, yeah, I kind of stopped doing that because I wasn't noticing anything. I was like, buddy, you got to finish a bottle and then finish a bottle and then finish a bottle before we can even start working on your gut or these other things. Like you can't do it without it. And it's a way too to like, I don't know, we're not trying to weed people out, but it's like, if you don't grasp that, then I'm always trying to, improve my way of communicating that to people. That's why, again, I share literature, I share studies, I share documents. It's like, hey, you got to take 4 grams a day for 3 months. And if you're not doing it, then you ain't going to do it. And some people are like, okay, I understand. And then they do it. And some people are like, yeah, I kind of stopped that because it wasn't feeling good. So I think my number one answer, coming back to your original question a while ago, was like, work with somebody that's going to teach you, hey, this is why this is working, this is why this isn't working. And then also just understand that even if you're working with the right person, which hopefully is me, we don't get everything right. Nobody does, in the functional medicine world, but you got to be able to know, like, if you hit a roadblock, here's how we get around it. I see so many people that come to me and they're like, I was working with a practitioner and I liked them, but I hit a plateau and they did not know how to get past it. We didn't know what to do next. And I'm like, that's probably my number. Anybody can do a stool test. Be like, you need a probiotic, you need an antimicrobial, you need a leaky gut protocol. That is so easy. And there's so many people doing it now. The people that are coming to me are the people that have been to 3-4 practitioners and they're like, okay, I need somebody a little more nuanced or things like that, as to why am I not getting well?
Yeah. It's combining that art and science, it seems. Really, the back half of this conversation, to me, it's like, there's a scientific element to it, but then there's also the art of understanding the person and the situation that they're in and what might work, for that person in particular.
Yeah. Well, and that is, I agree. First off, Ryan, sorry to jump in, but like the science is, it's hard to understand. There's a lot of science, but once you understand it, it's like memorization, a lot of it, you know, and I'm good at memorizing things. But the art of like putting the supplements together, or knowing when a person's too overwhelmed, or
Mm-hmm.
knowing when somebody's got pill fatigue or lab fatigue, or pulling back. Sometimes I pull back and like, hey, for the next month, we just need to do about a little bit of nothing. And then knowing when to push hard again, or, you know, knowing if somebody's got, like I saw this guy this week that came in as a new patient, and I had helped his daughter. And at first I put her on a supplement and I was like, this is what you should do. And they were like, she has a tree nut allergy. It's like, oh crap. Okay, well, we need to pick a different one. And knowing, again, what are the plan Bs, plan Cs, plan Ds if somebody reacts negatively to a supplement, or, you know, what are the other, that's why I have an entire store. Mostly it's not because of like selling at retail, it's because I needed all these tools to be in my toolbox because sometimes I use them, but sometimes I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the, you know, obviously in a humble way, I like that word, the art of it, because that's what I see that gets better and better and better as as I'm older and more in practice and seeing, you know, thousands of different people. You're like, oh, you remind me of this person, and there is a lot of art
Yep.
to it. Yeah.
Well,
But
Dr. Taylor, I think that is a wonderful place for us to end here. For the listeners, if you guys enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoy, me interviewing Dr. Taylor, let us know in the comments, and we'll be sure to do more of these. And this was a very fun, not our first interview, first one on the Autoimmune Doc channel. But Dr. Taylor, always such a pleasure.
always a pleasure to talk to you too, Ryan. And this is great. I mean, I love this. I told you, you know, off the air, it's like, this is the easiest thing for me is just sit down and have you ask me questions because I got an opinion. And I always tell people too, this is a good ender. I'm not saying my opinion's right. I think it is. That's why it's mine. That's why I have it. But I'm not saying like it's my way or the highway or my opinion's always right. But I'm always happy to give it. And I'm always happy to explain where I got it from and the evidence. Because if it's something I don't know about, then I won't have an opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something that I've researched or studied or seen, then I'll have an opinion on it. But it's not saying it's always right.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like one thing that always stood out to me about you was just the not being married to any one solution. You find a lot of people in this industry tend to get married to one approach, whether it's a certain diet or maybe even just a certain supplement. They get known as the guy for one particular thing. And when that thing is a diet or a supplement or this, that, or the other, it kind of takes away that nuance that this whole conversation has revolved around. And always appreciated that about you and just your ability to not be married to any one solution.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And yeah, nuanced. That's the
Nuance.
word. That's our word of the day.
No doubt about that. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next time.
All right. See ya.